I'm now recording. All right, perfect. So, hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Adrienne Guillory. I'm with Usability Sciences, and I'm super excited to be hosting this conversation tonight. You know what? I did not make the slide, but I still have to do the commercial. So we have to thank Jeff Schuler and Usability Sciences for giving us the opportunity. So a little bit about Usability Sciences. So we are a user research firm based out of Dallas, Texas, but we do international research. Our team is comprised of mostly researchers. Our services ran the gamut. You can take a look at usabilitysciences.com to get a better feel for what we do. We have our own in-house recruiting team. We conduct design thinking workshops, exploratory research, all the way down to evaluative research and everything in between. We are super excited. We love everything about research and helping our clients understand the people who make up their experiences. So that's enough of that. Moving on to the part that I'm most excited about. So if you joined this early, you probably gathered that Vicki and I are super, super close. We actually met at Usability Sciences many, many moons ago. We both left, and then of course I came back. But Vicki has gone on to kind of be a powerhouse in her own right at various companies. So she was at AT&T for a while. She was at Grubhub. She's now at BlackRock. Don't think I left anything out.
JCPenney at one point. That was actually where I left. Yeah.
And JCPenney's, absolutely. And so she and I often go back and forth. Hey, what do you think about this? If you've ever heard me speak before, I always say, make sure you have a good circle around you, people you can learn and grow from. And Vicki is absolutely that for me. So we got into this conversation about KPIs and metrics, and she goes on one of these wonderful rants, and I said, I need you to share that with my audience. So she agreed to do that. Vicki, thank you so much for taking time to put together this presentation. Y'all, this is for this audience. She built this for us, and I know you have a lot going on. With that, I will, hold on real quick. Yep, Paige, USC. We can hear, okay. Y'all, we are a big, huge family of alumni, so it's good to see y'all here. With that, Victoria, I will pass it on to you.
All right. I just want to add a little context to our friendship. Something that makes me giggle a little bit is Adrienne and I knew each other for maybe 2 years. And if you know me, my family's English. They can be a little bit standoffish culture-wise, and that's definitely been embedded in me. And if you know Adrienne, she's really outgoing. She gives people hugs. And I think it took 2 years, Adrienne, for you to hug me. And you said, or for me to let you hug me. And I remember you called that out. You were like, do you know this took 2 years? And I think you had to back me into a corner when you did hug me.
And y'all, it sounds creepy, but it wasn't. She really wanted the hug. So please don't call me But yes, right. You were very different.
All right, I'm gonna stop my video feed because, like many people during this pandemic, my at-home setup is not the greatest. So I'm going to be moving between 2 computers as I present this to you, and I don't want you guys to be distracted with probably what's going to look like someone watching a tennis game as they present. So I'm going to stop my video, but I'm going to share my screen, and let's do that. And let me go into presentation mode. All right. Anyways, just to begin with, thank you, Adrienne and Usability Sciences for inviting me to speak. I think Adrienne's been trying to get me to do this for a long time, and I tend to be a little bit slippery because I like to watch Great British Bake Off in the evenings. So just to begin, I know Adrienne kind of introduced us, just a little bit of background about me. So you guys might be wondering, who is this lady? I've been a UX researcher or UX research practitioner since 2008. I started my career, as Adrienne mentioned, at Usability Sciences. I had worked in marketing research before that and had a chance encounter at a Christmas party one year and was invited to come and interview and apply for a job at USC. Since then, I've managed and led UX research teams at JCPenney, AT&T, Grubhub Seamless, and now BlackRock. So a lot of flipping back and forth actually between consumer and enterprise products, which I kind of try to do to keep balance in my resume and my experience. I would consider myself a traditional qualitative methods-based researcher. However, as I've become a UX research leader, I have continuously been thrust into the world of metrics. And so that's what I'm going to share with you guys today, that story and what I've learned from that. And then also just a little bit of background about me. I'm also a well-documented cat lover. My sister recently sent me this photo here and made the comment that every school picture she found of me from elementary school, I was wearing cat clothing. And I was like, there's no way. She then followed that up with this picture where it's another photo of me in a shirt that literally says, I love cats. And then she sent this bottom picture to me and was like, if you're not wearing cat clothing, you're always holding the cat. So just that little bit of background. Apparently a well-established cat lover. And I know Lori Whitaker's on this call, and her and I talk cats all the time. All right, so I always like to set expectations with my presentations, so you guys, don't have a face like the man on the right. So what are you guys gonna get from this presentation today, or what can you expect from it? Well, first off, like I mentioned, it's going to be me sharing what I've learned from my experiences being a UX research leader and taking on establishing metrics, implementing metrics, and also taking over kind of disparate metrics programs within various organizations. It's kind of become a trend that I've seen over the last number of organizations that I've worked at. This is not going to be a how-to guide or a manual because I don't know if that really exists. I think every organization has different needs. And while there might be some wrong turns you can take here, I don't know if there's really a right way. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind. I do think this presentation might be best suited for smaller or newer UX organizations, or maybe chaotic ones. That might be another category. And also my idea of success for this presentation today is just that we have maybe a lively discussion afterwards or a Q&A. And my hope is that maybe one of you guys takes something from this that inspires you in the work that you do. And you reach out to me later and let me know how you maybe applied it or improved upon it or have learned another lesson from what you've taken on. And another thing is I'm very vulnerable, or I feel vulnerable because I'm not a designer and I never think my presentations look attractive. And so just keep that in mind today. Like I had to put this together. I usually go into an organization and get designers to set up templates for me so our presentations look a little more profesh. Today I just created my own using a template from Google, and just keep that in mind. Don't judge too hard. So first, I wanted to cover my experience as to why UX research teams often get involved with metrics or are brought in, and why that's taking place. And I've had kind of two reoccurring reasons for that. So the first is I'm often brought in by our product stakeholders or our chief product officer to explain metric results stakeholders do not understand. And the common questions I get, and these are literally questions that have been asked me in numerous organizations. So one, something along the lines of like, our NPS doesn't significantly change over time. Do you know why that might be? Or something along the lines of, our CSAT fluctuates drastically and we have no idea why. Can you help us understand what's taking place? Those are huge questions. And if you guys have ever been asked those questions yourself, that's kind of like a daunting place to start. And what it results in is a UX research team having to not only audit the method and the application of the method that's maybe been utilized by another organization, say like marketing research with MPS. Oftentimes I've seen CSAT be owned by product teams or as well by marketing research. But it also means not only are we auditing the method and the application of it to determine if something about that is causing these fluctuations or this stagnant result, but then we're also going to have to dive into any open-ended feedback they might be collecting to determine if something's taking place in the experience that's impacting it, or if they're not collecting open-ended feedback, figuring out a way for us to collect that feedback so we can understand what's going on. And as many of you guys know, UX research teams are pretty historically understaffed within design organizations, product organizations. So when you have a team that's already spread thin, this is a lot to take on, to have to go in and explain someone else's metric. The next reason is UX research teams or UX teams, design organizations are being asked to show or prove their value and their impact on products. And what I've seen as a UX research leader is I've had my design leaders or my design VP or come to me and say, hey, how do we begin to measure quality in our products? How do we know if our products are good or bad? And how do we know if we're improving over time? Because we need to understand that in order to show our value to the organization so we can build our team. And again, that often results in a UX research team being asked to oversee and establish a metric for the design organization. Sometimes that might mean creating an entirely new method or metric. And sometimes that might mean looking at available methods and applying that to the situation if appropriate. I've done both of those things, and I'm going to share my experience kind of taking both of those routes to creating something completely new versus using an established method, something like SUS to do this, or a benchmarking program. So what I'm going to go into now is I believe I have 8 or 9 kind of key insights, what I've learned. And this is when I have to go back and forth. Hold on a second. Let me go back to my other computer. What I've learned from those and kind of takeaways that I'm hoping that you guys can take home with you and think about as well. So the first is pretty obvious. Create a strategy before you create a metric. I've definitely seen people be asked to create a metric and just jump right in and create one because they've been asked without really thinking through, like, why are we creating this? Does something else exist already that might answer this question? What other data is out there that our organization is collecting? And then also maybe understanding how would this metric we create fit or relate to the other data. And so without creating a plan, the risk that you run is that if your metric that maybe you are implementing, once you begin to report on it, if it doesn't match the expectations of your audience, they may question why the metric you're presenting or you're reporting on differs from, say, RMPS. And without having that understanding going into that meeting, you can come off as really ill-prepared. So you want to have a strategy. You want to understand what other data is out there, what's being collected, how you can interpret that data, what does it mean about the experience. And if you are to create a metric, if it is appropriate at that time to create a metric or implement a metric, what's the path forward that you would take and how would it relate to those? So the second learning is a real easy way to just begin to create strategy is utilizing a framework. And I hope everyone here is familiar with a framework like HEART, right? HEART is a pretty well-established framework. It's pretty easy to implement and apply. And for those of you that aren't, it was established, I think, about a decade ago at this point by researchers at Google. HEART is essentially, when you're looking at the user experience, understanding what the indications or the indicators of an experience are. And in the HEART framework, those indicators are happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. So the idea is by understanding the goals that your users might have and how they relate to those indicators, what signals that you might notice that tell you whether or not those goals are being met, and that what metrics you might be collecting or you might need to collect in order to determine what's actually taking place. I think it's pretty standard if any of you are applying the HEART framework that you kind of begin with a grid like the one that I have here. One of the things that I think works really well when setting up a strategy along this lines and utilizing this framework is to use or create a workshop, bring in a cross-functional team, bring in your other research partners from various teams, marketing research, if they're doing MPS, your data analytics team, data scientists, et cetera, bring in a few key product leads, a few key design leads, and come together and determine, like, what does this framework look like for us? And as a fun, actually, hold on a second, I'm going to come back. As a fun practice, I did this for Adrian. And Adrian, you can pay me later. But I went through and thought about what does that framework look like for Adrian and this kind of like presentation or knowledge sharing series she does. So I thought about what are the indicators that this lecture series, presentation series is successful. What kind of goals might audience members have coming into this? In regards to happiness, audience members might be recommending this lecture series to colleagues if they're content with it, if it's taught them something, if they were happy with the experience that they had. And one of the signals we might see from that is ever increasing attendance numbers. And the ways that we can measure that are through, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, actual NPS. Actual NPS differs a bit from NPS. Rather than saying how likely would you be to recommend, it's asking, have you recommended this lecture series in this case in a certain time frame? We could also collect open qualitative feedback that I'm sure Adrienne hears from those of you she has relationships with, that she might gather from LinkedIn comments, or that she could even send a survey out afterwards and collect to determine what the sentiment or feelings were towards this lecture series. The next, engagement, thinking through goals and behaviors. I thought, audience members might stay for the duration of the presentation. So if you guys enjoy this, I would assume that you would stay throughout so you could hear everything that I have to say. Additionally, those that are engaged might also have questions or want to share their own stories. So participating in that discussion at the end, a lively discussion shows engagement, right? So those would be the signals: web conference headcounts, pre and post, number of questions asked post-lecture, and we could create metrics around ticket sales, attendance headcount, number of questions submitted, etc., to keep track of how engaged is our audience. Next, adoption. So how would we know if users of this lecture series or audience members are adopting what they learned in this? We would hope, our goal would be that they would apply the presentation learnings in their real life to much success. And a signal might be audience members provide feedback on what they got out of the presentation. We could administer a CSAT to determine the level of satisfaction. And we could collect qualitative feedback to understand, as a follow-up, how you might be adopting or applying what you learn in these lecture series in your real life. From a retention perspective, I thought to myself, well, if an audience returns for future presentations because they associate the series with sharing and insightful, valuable information, so we would continuously, in the signals, see the names and faces of in attendance, and attendees develop relationships as they network. So those would be signals that we're retaining those customers. And you could create a returning user metric. We could definitely keep track of how many times a user has attended a lecture, and where we're seeing drop off with that. And then finally, and maybe the hardest application to this lecture series, was task success. However, I thought about the world of COVID, and these lecture series are all remote these days. And Adrienne could audience members successfully log into the web conferencing provider with no issue. I think that would be a core task when running a lecture series. I know we've all experienced WebExes, Zoom meetings, where we've had a lot of technical issues and you end up starting the meeting very late. So signals of that would be perhaps a dry run prior to the web conference where Adrienne could prove that it was quick and fast access. There would be no need for troubleshooting issues that users or audience members might have. And I think another clear indication is the presentation starts on time, because I'm sure we've all definitely experienced a 30-minute meeting where you have 10 minutes of technical problems and then 20 minutes left to remain. So Adrienne could create a benchmark. She could track success and failure with users. She could see time on task. How long does it take users to log in? And she could also keep track of start times for each of these presentations. Are we starting on time? And with that framework, if Adrienne were to collect that at intervals after each of these lecture series, USC would have a very good idea of the full picture of how the audience's experience with this lecture series is. Adrienne and I will be sending my bill later, but this is my example of the application of the HEART framework, and how by applying the HEART framework, you get a really well-rounded picture of what is taking place. You can go wrong with this approach, and I've seen this happen. As I mentioned in previous slides, one of the things I do recommend is auditing your organization to understand all of the data that you're collecting, who's collecting it, how often they're collecting it, all of those things. And doing the audit before you do this, I've seen teams, well, the intention of this, to begin with, the intention of this grid is you should be working typically starting with users' goals or users' behaviors, right? So you're going to be working left to right. And usually we'll go through activities where individuals within the workshop, like we all do, create Post-its, and we're grouping like what we think those goals and behaviors would be for happiness, discussing, narrowing, etc. And we would begin to move through this process from left to right. However, what I have seen and where you can go wrong is where people move through this right to left, and they kind of backfill their metrics and what they think about their metrics first, and then try to fill in signals, goals, and behaviors so they can be like, all our metrics fit in here. And that does not work as well. One of the things that might actually happen when you move through this, starting with the way users' goals and users' behaviors, is you might find out that some of your metrics aren't informative, and maybe you don't need them. And I would highly recommend, if you're collecting data and you are not using it, it is not informing anything, that you consider not collecting it, because that is just exhausting the user. What I would also say is, you're going to say, I have blind spots. How are we going to address those blind spots? How can we begin to collect or create metrics or implement a metric that's going to allow us to measure these signals? And so that's why, you always want to start with the user, but that's why working your way left to right. Don't be someone who starts with metric and goes right to left. All right. So next, and hold on, I'm supposed to be using my notes per Adrian, but I'm doing what I normally do, which is just speaking from my head. So let me get myself on track on my other slide. All right. All right, so next one, number 4, metrics are not diagnostic. And I really enjoy this little cartoon here on the side. I think it's a really good example of metrics not being diagnostic. So you can see here, the nurse is telling the patient, I'm sorry, the doctor no longer makes diagnoses. And I guess, as you can imagine, the frustration you might feel if you went to the doctor because you weren't feeling well, especially now in the time of COVID, the doctor takes your temperature, oh my gosh, it's 104. And then just walks away from you without any other information. You have no better understanding of, hey, why is my temperature 104? He doesn't tell you what you can do to lower your temperature. You just know my temperature is 104. And that's essentially what it's like to produce a metric without any open-ended feedback or any qualitative feedback that you compare with that metric. You don't know what's going on. So that is what I will say. I have seen teams produce a true metric, present it to an organization, but not be able to provide feedback as to why those are the organization's results, or how they might improve their metric through a deeper understanding of why that is their metric. And it's going to be the first question your product organization or your stakeholders ask you when you present a metric is that good? Why is it our metric? And then, well, what do we do about it? How do we improve it? So you have to consider pairing qualitative feedback with any metric that you are producing. Next, number 5. Another thing that I've learned is that one of the biggest challenges of introducing and establishing a new metric is often adoption by your stakeholders. Prior to collecting the data to even produce your metric, I really suggest a huge educational effort to ensure that your partners understand what this metric is, what purpose it's going to serve, what it will mean for them, and I cannot stress how it will empower them. Because like most humans, a new metric might create fear, especially for your product leads whose performance can often be tied to various KPIs and KEIs. All of a sudden, they might have a new metric that they're going to be responsible. They might be concerned that it exposes them to some sort of weakness, something that they're not doing. And then also, they might not be certain, like, how am I going to control this metric? How am I going to drive it up? Am I going to be responsible for this? What is that going to look like? So you're going to be met with a lot of fear and uncertainty. And so an educational element is definitely very, very beneficial. And as I mentioned earlier, and this is a note as well, this adoption issue, this is also where sometimes creating a new metric versus utilizing an established method to create or implement a metric can actually provide an even greater hurdle for you. A new metric, one you create on your own, and I know many organizations do it, and I don't want to discourage anyone from doing it if that's right for you. But when a metric does not have a proven track record or history or some rigor around it that you can use to back up why that metric is meaningful, depending on your organization, it can be even more challenging to encourage them to adopt it because it has no proven efficacy. And you might not be certain how are we going to improve this if you haven't utilized it or had someone else utilize it in the past. So it's something to consider. I don't want to discourage people. For some people, that's right. It's definitely innovative, but with organizations that might be a little more formal, a little more conservative, you might want to consider how you piece together a program with established methods. All right. Next one. Adrienne and I argued over this image a little bit. She wanted another one. Expect surprises. And I'm going to do a little storytelling here on what that means. At an organization that I worked in the past, I was asked to create a new metric. And that metric was being referred to as a quality metric. And the idea was the design organization wanted a metric to pair with essentially our business metrics to kind of counter business decisions to show why constraints weren't always the best, why sometimes we should choose quality of design, even though that might take a little bit longer, and that this metric would pair with that to kind of create that friction or discussion. However, when I dug at it a bit with the request from the design leaders as to why we needed this, what I learned is that what the design organization really desired was a deeper understanding of the results of our A/B testing framework. The design organization was often creating designs that we'd seen through usability studies to test better than our existing design that our designers as design experts felt looked better, utilized design principles, design practices, were just overall better designs. But we would put them into the A/B testing framework and they would not be successful. And ultimately, we'd have to go back to the drawing board, but without much feedback to go back to the drawing board with. So why didn't it work? We didn't know. So rather than creating a quality metric, because quality, if you guys don't know, is a really abstract, topic for people, because quality is really based off your experiences, and everyone has different experiences. And your understanding of quality is based off your comparison to what you've experienced in the past. So begin to measure that was a really, really hard thing to do. So instead, working with the data science team, we created a model that allowed us to take a deeper look at where organic behavior might be breaking down within our variance in the A/B testing framework. And with our understanding of churn data and what factors cause users to churn, we could actually narrow down what was taking place within these variants and have a better understanding of how the design might have impacted user behavior. But ultimately, what we actually learned is by taking the data from our finance team who ran our A/B testing framework and cleaning that and running it through our quality model, we found that the A/B testing framework was riddled with bugs because product teams were releasing A/B tests and they were responsible for doing the QA. And often in their haste to get them released to meet timelines, they were skipping QA. And so the unexpected results the design organization was often seeing were unexpected because the variants had bugs. So we hired a QA team. We cleaned up our A/B testing framework and we greatly reduced the amount of tests that came back from the design org with unexpected results for us. So that was not what I expected from that process. That was a very lengthy process for me to put that all together, and I hope that story made sense to you guys. But it was not the expectation that we had. I had a design leader ask for a metric. And ultimately what we learned was we needed to hire people to do QA because our product team just did not have the time. So number 7 in the things that I have learned is you need to define success for your metric before you even begin to collect data. And what I mean by that is that most people think of success as only upwards movement. But there are many instances when a neutral result is also successful. And it is much easier to set this expectation prior to even collecting the data when you're going through that educational effort, rather than to try to explain it in your presentation post when you have the results. Explaining it post kind of makes you feel like you look like you're scrambling for an explanation or trying to create a justification for the results. So you want to set that as early as possible. And the best example I have of this, and I've seen this happen, it's my 3rd go around on this one, is when you're working with a design organization that's implementing a new design system or pattern library. Oftentimes the application of a new design system, it might not actually affect user behavior at all. So if you're looking for increases in conversion and lifetime value, and all other sorts of metrics that you might be evaluating in the A/B testing framework, and you see no increase, you just see neutral, and your organization considers neutral failure, you're gonna have a really hard time getting that design system released. And you're gonna have a very frustrated design organization. So keep that in mind if that ever occurs for you. Set those results that neutral can often be successful. Generally, upwards movement is functionality changes or design changes that might have negatively impacted the way users interpret functionality. Look and feel doesn't usually shift a metric hugely. All right, next. I love Kristen. So don't surprise anyone with data and metrics. Otherwise, their face might look like this. So you don't want to take your stakeholders by surprise and blast out this whole new metrics program that you've put together. You want to create a socialization plan that should begin with making sure your stakeholders are aware of the programs you are supporting, educated on what metrics you are collecting, when you're collecting those metrics, and aware of the scores prior to them being presented broadly within organization or leadership. I call it a soft opening. If I'm going to implement a new metric that's new to this organization, I'm going to take each of the product leads aside, each of the design leads aside, and go through it with them prior. And the other thing this allows me to do is, as I work with them to show them the metric and the insights that we've collected through this, I can also talk with them about, well, how are we going to begin to address these things? And that means when I do socialize it or share it with the organization or with leadership, not only am I maybe presenting to them problems, but I'm also presenting to them the steps we're taking to solve for those problems. And that's always going to make you seem like a better researcher or a better employee, because if you don't know it yet, what your manager, what your leaders want is you to take problems from them or present a problem to them with a solution that's already set in motion. A lot of people don't want a problem that you have no thought towards how you're going to solve this. So it makes you look better. It makes your product leaders look better. It helps with the adoption factor that we talked about earlier. And I'm sure all of us might be familiar, I hope you aren't or haven't had this experience, with sometimes people wanting to weaponize data. They want to spring it on someone as some sort of aha moment. Avoid that at all costs and be wary of people who suggest that. All right. Next is, let me move my slide. Communicate how your metrics will be delivered. And you can see here I have a very simple report card. It's been a long time since I've been in elementary school. I hope report cards still kind of look like this. But yes, I chose this picture for a purpose. I feel like this very simple graphic conveys to me subjects. We have different subjects. We have scores for those subjects. I mean, they're killing it. A+ across the board here. And then the little squiggly lines underneath speak to me about maybe some teacher feedback or what I would consider qualitative feedback about why we have those scores. And that's kind of what your report card should look like. Your report card needs to communicate what is currently happening, how that compares to what has happened in the past, and why it's happening, why your scores are what they are. And things to consider when creating your reporting strategy. You want to consider how frequently you're collecting these various metrics, the amount of work it takes to compile and report on your framework, and how you will share the metrics, maybe initially through presentations or a socialization plan. But you also want to make sure that they're accessible via a dashboard, because having people reach out to your team constantly to send you that data is going to bottleneck them as well as exhaust your team. And also your release schedules, your report card schedule is really going to depend on the frequency of how you're collecting these metrics, as well as maybe your product release schedule and just your general needs of the organization. And then number 10. And this one, I mean, I would be open to people telling me how this has worked for them, but my suggestion is don't aggregate your metrics. And you can see here I have a thumbs up sign. I have been asked before if I could take all of the metrics that we are tracking within the HARP framework and maybe roll them up into a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And the question I then ask is like, so what if I report on a thumbs down? What are you going to ask me? And they're going to be like, well, I want to know what happens. And I'm like, well, that's why the report card works well. And I'll go back for a second, because imagine, I don't know how many of you have kids, but I think we can all imagine what it's like to have kids. Imagine if your kids just came home with a report card that had a thumbs up on it. I mean, I would have some questions. I would also, what does that mean for one? What is this thumbs up? For what subject matter? I'd also, you know, by aggregating your score, you may not have an understanding of where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are, what's working and what's not working. And all that context is what's going to allow you to take action from the metrics and the data that you are collecting. So my suggestion is not to aggregate, because ultimately you're going to have to break it down anyways. To keep your metrics within a report card, speaking to the various indicators and the data that you're collecting for each of those within the HARP framework. All right, and then finally, this is my last insight. Metrics mean nothing if we don't learn from them and are unable to take action from them. So expect to be involved in not only establishing your metric framework, collecting the metrics, socializing those metrics in that framework, but also talking about what the process is for your organization to take action from that. Generally, what I've seen is that takes place two ways, at a micro level and at a macro level. So you will be sharing the data that you collect with your various product leads and discussing what that means in regards to the area that they own and what they can do with where they are now to maybe begin to take action from low-hanging fruit, to begin to have things that they can think about for the roadmap in the future. But you are also probably going to unearth maybe some larger issues that aren't specific to just individual product leads, like system stability, speed. You know, no individual product owner might own that. And that's something you're going to want to bring to leadership, and they're going to have to address by putting it on the larger roadmap and beginning to think about how large an effort that is, how much money they might need to invest, and what time frame is realistic to do that. The micro level is much easier, especially if you have really strong relationships with your product leads. The macro level, getting leadership to begin to plan to take action from some of the bigger insights that you have from the feedback that you're collecting. I can't give you a path. It's different for every organization, and that can actually be a very challenging part of it. But if you have an organization that really wants to get better, you guys will figure it out. And with that being said, in summary, so my 10 insights: create a strategy before a metric. You can create that strategy easily by just utilizing a framework, something like HART. I believe there are others as well, but HART to me is just one of the easier ones to apply. Metrics are not diagnostic, so always remember you want to make sure you're collecting qualitative feedback that you can partner with them. Adoption of a metric can be challenging. Make sure when you put together that socialization plan that you do that soft opening so your product leads know what's coming and have already maybe planned for it and put that plan together with you for your presentation. Expect surprises. Going through the process of creating an absolutely new metric, you're going to have surprises. It's going to be a trial and error process. But it is really interesting. I wouldn't discourage you from it. It's just certain organizations are more up for it than others. Define success for your metric before data collection. So remember to keep in mind that neutral can be success, but just make that clear from the get-go. Don't surprise anyone with data or metrics. It's a very easy way to make enemies. Communicate how your metrics will be delivered. Put together that socialization plan. Make sure people are aware of it when you go through that educational effort early on. I would avoid aggregating your metrics. I mean, you can if you want. I just don't think it's very helpful. I think it's better to speak to those indicators of happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success, and show the individual results of each metric you're collecting. So you have that better understanding of the broader picture and where those weaknesses might lie. And be prepared to answer what's next. I don't know if it's just me. I sometimes feel jealous of other research teams within our organization, like an analytics team or marketing research. I feel like they're able to deliver the research insights and then end there. But my experience has been with UX research that we have to impact. So we get very, very involved in strategy and process to make sure that the insights that we're collecting are in fact impactful, are actionable, and are making our products better. And with that, Adrian asked me to put together resources that have helped me a lot. You're going to notice here that I'm a big fan of Tomer Sharon. Last fall, he put together a measuring happiness plan. I think it's like a 8-module kind of thought program. It's $10. If I put a link here, I actually think it's great. I purchased it and I now use it with my teams as a team building activity. We kind of do as a book club. We go through a module a week, and then we kind of every meeting that we have each week at the end on Friday, we talk about what we got from that module, how we could apply it, thoughts we had, what we agreed with, what we disagreed with. It might seem really basic, but as I put this presentation together, it seems really basic to me, but I definitely, everything I've said here, it's because I've experienced people who didn't know these things in organizations I've been in. And I think it's very helpful for junior researchers to begin to think through this, because I know a lot of UX researchers get really stuck sometimes in qualitative methods. And I think you need to be well-rounded, and you definitely need to understand how qual and quant can come together. The other one, how to measure anything, for anyone who's considering thinking through how to create their own metric, something new. This book is really, really insightful. It's probably kind of like a philosophy book in regards to math. I listened to it on Audible, and maybe as a bit of a nerd, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fascinating, but it definitely was one of the things that helped me begin to think through that quality metric story that I told you that became a quality model. I think we all know this one, Quantifying the User Experience, Jeff Sorrow, a lot about statistics. Various Medium articles by Jared Spool and Tomer Sharon on metrics and UX. It's something I'd noticed they'd started sharing kind of in the Twitter sphere, blogosphere, whatever, sphere a couple of years ago. And I caught my eye immediately because the things they were talking about were things that I were seeing in the organizations that I worked in. And then finally, utilizing HEART. If you're new to it, if you haven't heard of it, I've linked to a paper from the creators of HEART here, as well as to an intro to the HEART framework. It's kind of like HEART for dummies. It's definitely an easy place to get started. I think Adrian will probably be sending this out afterwards, so you guys will have access to all these links. And then look, here's me without a cat shirt on. And then also, if you guys have questions for me, if you want to follow up with me with stories that you have about your own journeys into the world of metrics, things that you've done that have worked well, I would love to hear it, because I myself am still learning, still want to learn, still want to hear about what's successful in other organizations. So reach out to me, let me know. I would greatly appreciate it. And with that, Adrian, what did I do? Whoa, I talked real long. I'm gonna stop talking and allow us to have some discussion.
Actually, no, you have questions.
Okay.
Stop sharing me because I look weird.
Oh, I stopped sharing, didn't I?
No, I still see me.
No, it says
Not in slow motion.
I'm seeing you because you're talking. No?
Mhm.
Hold on. So, oh, here we go. I am sharing you. My bad.
I'm like looking at myself and I'm like doing this weird flow thing. So
Now
Vicki,
I'm in darkness. Maybe I should turn on lights. Hold on. Let me do that real quick.
so thank you so much, Vicki. That was very insightful. I love the stories. Like I said, you have a lot of experience and you are, you do a really amazing job of getting in with the stakeholders, asking, questions and then tackling some of those really hard things. So far, I only have one question in the chat. First of all, Courtney Allen says, hello.
What up, Courtney? AT&T.
Her question was, Vicki, how do you know, what are the signs that you need to look for that you need to update your metrics? And then a follow-up to that is, how often should you check to see, are they still performing? Are they still measuring the things that you need to measure? How often should you look at those or update those?
I mean, my answer to that would be like continuously, you need to be checking those. When I talk about the audit, the way I've done the audit in the past, and this might answer the other question, how do you know when they're not working? They're not working when your organization's not learning from them. And I am as everyone should be, I'm very relationship based. I'm constantly checking in with my product and design leads to make sure they have the information they need to make decisions. So one of the things I do when I initially audit the organization is I'm looking at the data that we're collecting. I'm also looking at who's utilizing that data and how are they utilizing it. And it's one of the things that I've seen at a number of organizations is that because the metric maybe isn't fluctuating, maybe is fluctuating drastically, but they can't tell why, a lot of product owners who are kind of owned to those metrics begin to ignore the number themselves and just rely on the feedback that is being collected with the number. So my answer, long story short, is you should be continuously checking back in on that. You should be continuously trying to understand, are we collecting all the data that we need? Are there blind spots? You should be always checking in with your product team leads, your design team leads to understand what their blind spots are and maybe how you can go about getting access to that data. And if you're that involved in this framework, you're continuously monitoring the entire situation. Also, when it doesn't work, you're going to be the first to hear about it. So it's not a hard thing to stay on top of.
So Vicki, you and I and most UXs, right? We like to say, oh, we tell people their baby is ugly, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to say your metrics are wrong. So do you have any advice for, ways to be able to have that conversation with your product owners or stakeholders like, hey, I know what you're trying to do here, but your metrics are wrong?
Well, I could interpret your metrics are wrong in a number of ways. And this is, I'll interpret in the way that I've seen it before. I have seen people interpret metrics incorrectly. And so I think what you have to do when that takes place is understand how they're interpreting it and where bias or where error might be coming in, and then course correct for that. And there are definitely ways to course correct. I can give you a story about, for example, where I've seen that take place. I mean, I feel like these stories, I'm not supposed to really mention companies I work at, but I feel like there's enough context. You could just look at my LinkedIn and know where these are coming from. I worked for a retail company. They did a lot of A/B testing, as you can imagine, especially on the homepage at that time. A/B testing result where a variant of just graphics and text on the homepage and a variant with a human on the homepage with graphics and text. The variant with the human underperformed and lost the live intercept A/B testing. And the company made a decision to not show a human on their homepage again for a year because their logic was, oh, people don't like to see humans on the homepage, which is actually not correct from everything that we know from research.
Right.
And so what we began to do, I remember my the partner that I had, the woman that I worked with on A/B testing, I was like, that was shocking. Like their interpretation of that data was shocking to me. So we began to partner qualitative feedback with the A/B testing, utilizing usertesting.com, just so we could have some qual insights so people wouldn't jump to conclusions essentially and make maybe some poor conclusions. I have definitely seen a lot of people jump to crazy conclusions with data. And I do think that's why the qualitative feedback is so important to partner with any metric you're producing.
Right. Okay. So Vicki, you know me, right? And I've always, for a long time, I've grown up since, I struggled with metrics, right? For all the reasons that you've mentioned before, people kind of do all kind of crazy things. What would you say to a qual researcher who is just like anti-metrics?
I mean, I would say there is a place for metrics. And I understand why qualitative researchers maybe sometimes feel frustrated or irritated with the value people put on quantitative research and often try to poke holes in qual. But that being said, you have to understand what metrics provide an organization and especially leadership, which is, I had a product lead who said this really well at a previous company. He's like, it might not tell us what's wrong, but it lets us know something smells real bad. And so it's this quick indication of like, hey, we need to look into what's going on. And it allows them to observe that much, much more quickly than digging through data open text feedback might take, than the amount of time it might take to run a qualitative research study. It kind of signifies something's taking place. If you set up the framework in the manner that we discussed, it allows you to pinpoint what area that might be, and then to figure out how to either solve that from that or determine whether or not you need to maybe do a usability study or something to understand what's taking place more deeply.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So anyone else have any questions? Oh, there's one. Okay. Can you see this question, Vicki, in the chat?
It's not a compliment. My eyes can only see compliments.
Only see compliments. Okay, so I'm gonna say this. Okay. How do you determine which pair, right? So design problems with metrics. How do you pair them together? How do you determine which metrics help you with various design problems?
I mean, that kind of goes back. Well, I would want to know the examples of the design problems are, but that kind of goes back to the HEART framework, right? So we've essentially, through the framework and through setting up our framework, we've identified users' goal, user behaviors, what we consider the signals of those behaviors going well or not going well, and then what metrics we have that might measure those signals. So let's say you have a design problem. I don't know what this design problem might be, but I'm assuming the design problem is like a user's need is not being met, or we have some sort of pain point. You can take that and put it into the framework and rewrite that as like a goal that's essentially not being met, and then determine, are we collecting data or are we producing a metric that might tie back to that?
Okay. And then a follow-up is, do you support multi-methods on everything in terms of metrics? I guess multi-methods, not necessarily metrics, but on everything. Do you support multi-method?
I would love to be able to do that. It's a lot of work, and and Adrian knows this, I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I usually like challenges. So I go into organizations to set up teams and scale that team. And that means I usually start with a really small team. So ideally, I would like to be able to partner quant and qual together for almost anything that we can. But it's not always possible depending where we are in that evolution of setting up the team and establishing our methods. Ideally, when you get to a very mature place in that evolution, I think it's a good idea if you can do it.
Okay. I think does anyone else have any other questions? We only have about 2 more minutes. If not, I will say thank you, Victoria. I appreciate you spending time putting together this presentation and chatting with me. I think you're amazing. Everyone else on the call, we will share the recording as well as the presentation. If you have any questions, Vicki said you can reach out to her on LinkedIn. You can also send me messages. All right. If there is nothing else.
Wait.
Yes, Victoria.
My question is, can you stay on and we can chat after this?
I will call you, ma'am. All right. Bye, everybody.
All right.